Off to work we go, off to work we... Right, so this is your worst nightmare. So I'm going to show you how to do a leak check, and the first part of this is you isolate the boiler and you pressurise it to 1 bar. You then check the PRV, see if it's leaking, see if it's leaked in the past. That's step 1. If it holds at 1 bar, you've then got a carcass pipework problem, i.e. from the valves, pipework elsewhere, radiators, valves, TRVs and general pipework. So I'm going to show you what on a typical, this is about 12 radiators here, and radiators and towel rails and bits and pieces, no underfloor heating. This is what the drop from 1 bar to 0 is. So I would say that is about 1 litre to 1.5 litres of water. It's minimal, it's really low. So it doesn't take an awful lot, and what that will be is that will be the amount that it takes the expansion to deflate out and to go back to the static position. So where the diaphragm is pushed all the way out and the 1 bar or 0.75 of a bar is pushing against it. So clearly you also need to check the PRV and the diaphragm expansion vessel first. Then when you've done that, we'll go on to step 2. So step 2 is this. So you find the carcass pipework, and in this particular case we've got a pair of pipes. We've got a flow and return going backwards and forwards here, but what we've got a flow and a return here. So what I've done is cheekily, I've come down to here, I've put a isolation valve on one of the flow of the returns, and I've put an isolation on the other side, but I've also put a tee off, and the tee off is to a gauge. So the idea here is that we'll turn the system on, liven it up, we'll get a pressure reading, we'll isolate both of the valves, and then what we're doing is we're checking for pressure loss on the lower side, which will be the ground floor, and then the boiler reading will show what's upstairs. So also on this is a pair of pipes that underneath here go off for the underfloor heating stroke, well, not underfloor heating, my mistake, that go into the kitchen for the towel rail and various radiators. Now we're taking that out so that we are just testing the ground floor. And what I've done on the ground floor kitchen area is, yep, I've done a separate gauge on this showing the pressure. Oops, if you can see it, showing the pressure just on this radiator, that radiator over there, and another one in there, and a towel rail on the other side of here. And so we'll do a 24-hour test, and it looks like it's got a tiny drop because that was on 2 and it's now already under. So you clearly need to do a check to make sure that there's no weeps, nothing like that. And clearly some of the rads don't look great, but this is dropping, as I say, about that much in probably 24 to 48 hours. So somewhere in the system we've got a leak. So what I'm going to do now is step 3. So step 3 is, while I'm waiting, because this system I believe has got multiple leaks on it. I don't think it's down to one particular place. It could be, but I'm not sure. So what I'm going to do, this is the highest towel rail in the place. So I'm going to undo this and I'm going to dump some leak sealer in it. Now, the way leak sealer works is it's not my preferred choice, but this particular property is particularly bad for access. So I'll give you an idea. Every single cupboard is up to the brim with stuff. Everywhere you look, there's clutter everywhere. So with that in mind, I don't want to spend my life removing everything, and so I'm going to drain out, put in some leak sealer, give it a 24-hour test. But the key when you're doing the leak sealer is you pressurise it to about 1 bar. First of all, you make sure that you circulate. So I'm going to go through it now. So with a leak sealer of your choice, pop it in the rad or the towel roll. I normally put it in the towel roll. So clearly check the top, cover it up, and make sure all of the valves are open now. So this is the important bit. You check all of the valves are open, and then we turn the boiler on to a low temperature. Now I typically set it to about 35-40 degrees, let it circulate around the whole house for about 35 to 40 minutes, maybe a bit longer, and then you turn it off, and turn the boiler off and leave it off. And that's the key. You leave it off for at least 24 hours. And the idea then is that it leaks out wherever it needs to, seals with the air, drops in pressure, forms a crust, and then goes on from there to form a solid leak proof joint. It's not perfect. The idea is that you leave the leak sealer in there. As soon as you take it out, then potentially if the leak reappears, it won't reform, but you need to leave it in. So set the temperature nice and low. There you go, perfect. So we'll let that run for a while. It will try and run. We'll turn the heating gas back on. Boom. So should have heat. That'll circulate. It'll do what it does for a while. So record the pressure. And check underneath to make sure it hasn't leaked in the past. And this one doesn't look like it has because we've replaced it to double check. Back you go. So after a few minutes, it's sitting at 1.2, so we're going to leave this overnight. We've got 1.2 on that. We've got just under 2 on that. Now, for me, what I normally do is I would mark it with a pen. I can either take a picture of it and we'll leave it overnight. Now, one thing to consider when you're doing this is the outside ambient temperature. So if it's super high and super hot when you do it, and then it gets super cold when you check it the next day, clearly there'll be a slight discrepancy anyway. But we're looking for half decent drops on this. So I'm now going to take a look at this one, record this one, and I'm going to isolate this section. So tomorrow what I can do is check the boiler against this pressure here, and also because with this side, with the isolation here, we can check this one independently once we turn that off, the second ISO. There is another little trick. If you set it up like this, you can turn the ISO off on this, and then you can leave this, and this will have a static pressure in here of what you actually turned it on to. And tomorrow, if you flick that open and you see that that drops, that's the section that you've got the issue with. Make sense? Okay, so this is the next day. Alright, so you can dramatically see there. So it was up to 1 and above, and now it's gone right down to almost 0. So it looks like there's a drop in pressure on the lower circuit. The problem with this is that clearly on the boiler you've got an expansion vessel that holds some pressure. When this pressure here is affected by ambient temperatures, then it can drop dramatically. However, I think that's pretty significant, from say 1.1 down to 0 almost. So just to prove the point, if I open up the other valve, you'll see what the difference is from the original upstairs to what's downstairs. Now this has got leak sealer in it, so I'm kind of hoping that you'll see the difference now. Now I'll open up the valve. There you go, you can significantly see the difference. So we'll open that up, close that off again, and see if it resolves itself. So again, what I'm going to do is open up the valve, close it. Now it's held on that, and we'll see what happens over a period of a few hours. Okay, so I've done the same test, but I've put a bit more sensitive gauge on it so that it's easier to read. And clearly we've got the black and the red directly over each other so that we can monitor it. So open up the valve and you've got full pressure. Those two are off now, and that's where the pressure is. So I'll leave it a few hours and we'll come back to it and see what it comes back with. So one thing I forgot to say is yesterday when this was heated water, clearly it's going to be X pressure, say 1.5, and then when it cools down it's going to shrink in value, which in theory could bring it down to about what it is now. Now on the boiler side, which is isolated from this, it's showing 1.2. Well, clearly it's showing 1.3 with the pump running, but then when it cools down, the water expands and contracts within the expansion vessel. So this value on this side without the expansion vessel will be very, very quickly, significantly impacted because it has no expansion vessel, because there is no place for the water on this side to expand and contract into, and for that diaphragm to take up the slack if there were a leak. So I hope that makes sense. So we'll come back and see what happens. So I've deduced that there's an issue on the ground floor, and now I think we've got an idea that it's down here. Right, being sent this, wow, for my flavour of the month. So this is a camera, and I'm going to call this a straight out of the box review. Oh, look at this, so a little camera. What you got? Oh wow, decent sized display. That is big. So big to the end. USB charger, a couple of fish hooks I'm guessing, and magnets and stuff to put on the end. I'm guessing somewhere in there. Yep, there it is. So I'm going to hook this up and give it a go. Right, as good a time as any. So this is the step. Oh, blimey, that is bright. Okay, it's got a little camera light at the end. Oh, this is pretty long. So I'm trying to find a leak somewhere, and the long and the short of it is, we will check it out from over here. So, picture's clear. So now we've just got to track that. So the idea is that you will use that to locate your leak, and hopefully there it is over there. I can see a drip right at the back there. Here she comes. This is decent. Don't mind this piece of equipment. So we'll go looking elsewhere for other stuff. The USB cable, so, and the beauty of this is you can just slip it through places where you ordinarily wouldn't be able to yourself, and all of a sudden you've got a camera that you can view stuff. So here I'm trying to find a leak, which I've just located it to one of these T-fittings here. So nice piece of kit. Can't vouch for the quality, but the screen is definitely big. Yeah, thank you very much. Let's have a look. So that looks damp over there, but also it looks wet here. Definitely moisture. Cool coming through. So I'm just looking at this. That's definitely walled up. So okay, so we got 1.1 thereabouts. So I'm just going to top this to it. In fact, no, I'm not. I'm just going to leave it. I'm not going to top it up. So I know that there's about 1.1 now. It's cooler overnight, so clearly now it's going to start heating up. So that could technically go up to 1.2 with a bit of heat from residual heat from the house and that. So I'm going to leave that. I'm not going to top it up, but we will check this gauge, which in this particular case you can see has, if I show it there, has kind of dropped a tiny amount. Yeah. So there is a tiny bit of a weep on that, but again that could be down to temperature in this circuits here. So I'm kind of not going to get into that at the moment. I'm going to let it warm up, see what it does, and just check that again in a bit. But it's not a mega leak on that side. So now we just got the one encased. So I'm probably struggling with this place with space. So what we got? So we've had an overnight test, and that to me is pretty darn good. So that's an overnight test, and that stayed pretty static. Now, for those of you that can't see, it's ever so slightly under the red. Now again, that I believe is down to the temperature, ambient temperature. When this heats up a tiny bit from the sun, etc, etc, you could find that that'll go back up, but I believe that that is pretty much where the leak was. Thank God. Ah, silly me, I didn't open up the valve. Jesus. So, moment of truth. So this is what it was last night, and I'm hoping when I open this valve it stays in the same place. If it doesn't, wish me luck. So there's definitely a drop. You can see it there. About I'd say that was about 0.1, something like that, maybe a bit more. Okay, so we've got on the same job, I've changed this TRV because it was knackered, and I still believe that there's a leak, so I've done a leak over there underneath that board. Now I'm over here, and I've just noticed that there's moisture and rust here, which is shit for them but a good sign for me. So let's take a look and see what's going on. Okay, so let's see if there's a change from ambient temperature. So valve is closed and we're going to open it up. So clearly that was the drop this morning, and we're probably about 11 o'clock or so. So we'll open it up and see what it does. If it goes down even more, then that's conclusive that we've got a leak. If it goes up, then potentially here we go. So it stayed about in the same place. So it could be just the ambient temperature, or a bit of a shift and it could be just staying. So what I'm going to do now is punch it back up and we'll see that it goes back up. Clearly the only problem with that is that it affects next door, so what I should really do is pressurise it on this side from here with a bit of air. Right, so we've got a little setup into the valve. So the first thing I do is just put a bit of charge in it. The reason being is that we want to test this first of all, so it doesn't appear to be leaking, otherwise it drops straight away. Then after that we've got 1 point whatever in it, so we've got 1.5 thereabouts. Open up the valve, and so we're dropping down to about 1 point thereabouts, 1.5. So I'm just going to put this up to 1.5 because at the very least this system will end up being at least 1.5. Let it stabilise for a second. Yeah. Okay, so we've got about 1.55 thereabouts in it. Okay, so now what we're going to do, got a bit of movement in that radiator there. We could try and get that out. So I'll bleed that. So with this one back on, up the charge. We're about here. So put our gauge in the right place, turn it off and leave it. Crystal ball, tell me where the leak is after all. Tell me.
Oh, that's handy. Thank you very much indeed.
So it's a July day and typically it's raining, so the ambient temperature is going to be a lot cooler. So this is about day 3. So we had 1.2 in here when it was X amount of degrees. So we've got 1.1 now, yeah. So that's been on for 2.5 odd days, and yeah. Let's go and have a look at the other and see if we've got any change or dramatic changes. So this is where we were. So that's what we had before. And clearly the gauge isn't losing, or if it is, it's minuscule. Yeah. So if we now check, open up this valve, and we'll just see what the other gauge does. So the gauge is open and you've got no permissible drop there, or no, I'll rephrase that because it's gas talk. So you've got no real drop on it. There's an ambient change, so you've got a negligible difference. So in my opinion, we found the leak and we've resolved it. What I'm now going to do is I'm going to plumb in an extra expansion vessel. I'm going to put in another expansion vessel because I believe that the vessel inside of the boiler is probably just capable, and the reason why is because it's 8 litres. On an 8 litre combi boiler, kind of designed for 7 radiators thereabouts. That's what typically I judge them at. Smallish radiators and a small amount of pipework. Now this place has got a large amount of carcass pipework, but it's also got 3 towel rails on top, and it's also got, as I say, long carcass runs, and I believe that it's on the limit. And the reason why, again, is that plus if the customer doesn't get this annually serviced, which is highly likely, yeah, then at that moment they're pushing all of the carcass pipework and all of the limitations of the system. So if you put an extra expansion vessel in, what you're doing is you're upping the level of liability to them screwing up the servicing, and thus you're able to compensate a little bit of error. Plus, if they decide to pressurise the system to 1.8, let's say, and the pressure goes up to 2.4 ordinarily, with a double expansion 16 litres on this, because I'll put 8 litre in, you'll then get more area for it to expand into, and so long as it's annually serviced or every 18 months to 2 years, you should get away with it. So that's my comprehensive guide to finding a leak and resolving it. So after all of that, the customer had wanted, as I say, she was adamant that the last guy and everyone else had said definitely there's a leak in this floor here and somewhere in here, and would need to replumb essentially this radiator, which is quite a beef size, and plus this radiator here, we'd have to replumb them, so surface mount all the way around, and again surface mount all the way around from this, because this is coming through the floor all the way underneath all of these units, all the way up through. That's going to be difficult, plus all of the tap that I've got to move. So I'm pretty happy with this at 1.1. If I, for instance, if I run the tap now, warm up the boiler a bit, because this boiler hasn't been used at all, you've got a rise, clearly you would do, the pump's running, but after it slightly warms up, whatever residual water is in the boiler does what it does. You tend to find with a bit of use that will creep up to the 1.2 thereabouts. So that's all we can do, see how it goes and go from there, but if it changes I'll let you know. So I've just run the tap, the pump's turned off, 1.2,